Welcome to Life After, a podcast for women to take you from feeling like you're just surviving to thriving, to creating a life you really love. Expect to discover tips and tricks to get there. Each episode will have actionable steps to empower you to make changes. I started this podcast because I've been through it all, from getting out of a marriage with a narcissist to completely rebuilding my life. And now I'm on a mission to help you too. You can change your life. It's absolutely possible. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we are talking about something that I think a lot of people experience and don't always understand. It's that feeling of being lost, like nothing feels clear, you're muddy. And I've thought a lot about this as I've prepared for this episode. I want to throw in a little disclaimer because I find myself struggling to record. And the reason for that is we're talking in this episode about feeling lost, about, we'll look at it in terms of how we can feel in a fog when we feel lost, the reasons that we might feel lost. And so I just want to acknowledge, as you listen to this episode, if it feels a little heavier, I get that. I've tried to interweave the positive, the tips. I've tried to interweave the hope that you know you can get there and what your outcome is when you work through feeling lost, getting away from that feeling, getting away from feeling foggy-headed. Pardon me. And so I hope that translates. Please listen all the way through. We'll move through it. And again, I just wanted to acknowledge if I'm feeling this way from having written it and being on the other side of it, I understand that it might feel a little heavy listening to it. You'll get some benefit out of listening all the way through. So I really invite you to do that and hope you'll stick with me. All right. So as I prepared for this episode, I realized that in my own life, I have felt lost in 3 different situations. The first is when the narcissist in my life wanted me to feel lost and confused and disoriented. The second was when I was in a toxic or narcissistic relationship and it was ending, right? And that transition and what that transition looks like. We can sometimes feel lost. And the third, which I think is really the most relevant for looking forward, is those situations where I'm making what feels like a significant transition or change in my life that results ultimately in changing who I am, shifting my identity. Now, I've had several of all 3 of these situations happen throughout my life. So I'm hoping that I can weave through some great examples, personal examples that help you kind of track whether it resonates with you, whether you're in that space. So the feeling of being lost can be so unnerving, so unnerving. You don't, especially when you're going through an identity shift, you don't feel like your old self, but you're not really sure who your new self is, who you are now, who you're moving to becoming. You second guess things a lot. You feel that uncertainty, say that 10 times fast, maybe even a little untethered, right? You don't feel grounded. And when you feel that way, when you feel lost, it can feel like something is really wrong in your life. I want to invite you to consider, though, that feeling lost that feeling is actually, can be, often is, a part of the process of change as we're moving through change in our lives. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in previous episodes or not, but I'm in the process of writing a book, and its working title is The Year I Got Free and How You Can Too. And the idea of this book and I've always wanted to write a book. And so I have 2 or 3 books in my head that will eventually come out. This one percolated to the top because I really, really, really wanted to change my life professionally. After several events that I would never have linked, getting my master's degree, volunteering so much of my time and life and energy at Turning Point, I realized that I wanted to do something professionally that felt really meaningful to me. And that meant moving away from real estate, not completely walking away from it, because for those of you who are in real estate, that's hard to do. But moving towards something I felt really meaningful, that felt really meaningful to me. And so when I started at my last job, I thought that I'd found the way that I was going to be able to create this meaningful professional career. And I planned and wanted to stay at that job indefinitely. I mean, when I started that job, I had the most amazing boss, and I just thought, I can work here until I stop working. I really felt so passionately and strongly, and the work was so important. And then I have told this part of the story before. After just a few months, I got moved into a different department with a different director, and all hell broke loose. And in the process of that happening, going through that experience, I realized I became clear that staying there wasn't, that I was being pushed out and it wasn't going to work. And so what did that mean for my professional life, right? There's this big shift there. And what does it mean? And in order to sort that through that and do that, I really needed to get clarity, not just on what the next steps were going to be, but how I was going to do that. So in addition to being forced out of a job that I absolutely loved by a toxic boss, I was also facing the questions of, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do now? I definitely felt lost. And writing this book, and I'm, 2/3 of the way through it at this point, I decided as I sat down, I would write kind of what was happening journal style every day. And then I would go back and put together the themes that were happening as I moved through this transition into my next professional steps. And writing that way, even though I broke it down, I've broken the book down into quarters. And so I'm in the 3rd quarter, the fairly initial stages of the 3rd quarter, which is why I say I'm about 2/3 of the way through. Writing has given me so much clarity, not just on those early days, that 1st quarter of feeling so lost, but again, getting that clarity on how we end up in that state and what we can do next. I want to be really, really clear. Feeling lost, the working title of my book is The Year I Got Free and How You Can Too. Feeling lost and moving through that feeling does not automatically mean freedom is right around the corner. As I've said, I'm months into writing, and I've just recently realized that, yes, I've gotten way more clarity. I haven't completely moved into what my version of freedom is. And freedom means something different to everyone. So I thought about giving the examples of what my idea of freedom was. But the thing is, you have to decide for yourself what freedom looks like. Is it freedom with more time? Is it freedom because you have more money? Is it freedom because you want space or growth? Is it personal freedom? Is it professional freedom? Is it freedom from a relationship, right? We can have freedom from so many things. So this process of no longer feeling lost and shifting into a new identity, part of that process is deciding what freedom actually means to you. So keep in mind, ask yourself, I invite you to ask yourself that question. What does freedom mean to me? Recently, I was listening to Jim Collins on Tim Ferriss's podcast. That is a mouthful. And Mr. Collins, I don't know why I feel like I need to use Mr. Collins instead of Jim. That kind of made me laugh. He has a book out, called What to Make of a Life. I think it's his most recent book. And in it, he describes that there are times in our lives when we are in a fog. Now, I just want to say, I haven't read the book yet. I've ordered it, but I haven't read it yet. And I just listened to kind of the overall themes as they talked about them in the episode. I do recommend checking it out. It was a fantastic episode. In any case, I was really struck by how being in a fog is a really fantastic way to explain what happens when we're making changes in our lives. I also love his description of fog because while he wasn't referring to it in the ways that necessarily we're going to talk about, that feeling of being in a fog is often what's happening when we're in a toxic relationship. When you're in a fog, you're not necessarily going the wrong direction. Many of us assume that, and often it feels that way. In many cases, though, I'd say when you're in that fog, consider that you're not going in the wrong direction. You're just not sure what direction you're going in yet, right? So you could very well be going in the right direction. You just can't see very far ahead. Can maybe see a few steps in front of you, not the whole path. And I use this, we're going to talk about this. I'm sure I'm going to bring this example up, but I've talked about that in terms of I knew before my ex left that our relationship was over, right? So I still was in fog. I still didn't know what I was going to do. I still made some really questionable decisions, but I knew what I knew. And so I certainly didn't see what was coming and certainly didn't have the whole path laid out, but I wasn't doing the wrong thing. I wasn't going in the wrong direction. This fog phase can feel like that, though. You don't feel like you have clarity. You don't have certainty. You don't have a full plan. We never have a full plan, by the way. So let that go. If that's something that you are avoiding making any kind of change or shifting in your life, you'll never have the full plan in advance. So if you're someone who likes to feel like you're in control or likes to have the answers, that is certainly me. This whole process can feel so unbelievably uncomfortable. It can feel so uncomfortable. Man, I've been there. The great news, though, is that feeling lost or in this fog phase doesn't mean you're lost forever. It simply means that your visibility is limited right now. And that's okay. Sometimes we need to be in this phase. We need to recognize the phase that we're in, which then helps us to decide to actively take the steps that we need to move us forward. And I know it can feel uncomfortable. Man, seriously, I have been there. Maybe even feels painful depending upon the circumstances you're facing. You absolutely can move through the fog, feel less lost, and into a better place or space for you. Just like in nature, fog is a temporary state, right? If we look at it that way, we know we won't be in it forever. So, what's actually happening when we feel lost or confused or disoriented or we're in like this fog phase? And life just does not seem to be on the path that we want it to. There are a few reasons why this can happen. Pardon me. First is our identity is shifting. I alluded to that earlier. When you start to change something in your life, particularly something that's had an impact or is influential, or, a relationship that's been impactful, your identity starts to shift. What used to define you, how you showed up, how you made decisions, what you tolerated, it doesn't fit anymore. And that, in the early stages of that, while you're transitioning, it can feel really disorienting. Because if you're not that old version of you anymore, who are you? If you're in this space, if you're ever in this space, whether it's now, you may likely be in this space in the future, I recommend you try a couple of things. The first thing is start asking yourself what you want. Now, this is nothing new for those of you that have been listeners to this podcast, right? If we don't know what we want, that fog is going to persist, right? If we don't know what we want, we risk feeling lost lasting longer. And this isn't in the way of, this is going to be the one thing that changes my whole life kind of way. What do I want? Whether you are in any of the three situations I named at the top of the episode, you're in a narcissistic or toxic relationship, you're just getting out of it, or you're changing something in your life, you're having an identity shift for some reason, this will work for any of them. You start making the small decisions. What do I want for dinner? What do I want to wear today? What's my favorite color? When we are moving through that feeling of being lost or the fog, it's so helpful to reconnect on a really basic level those parts of ourselves that we want to keep and those things that we want to shift. So what does that look like? It looks like, let's go back to my boss example, right? I knew that I was being pushed out. I knew that it wasn't going to work. I knew that that wasn't going to be where I was able to stay professionally for a long period of time. So instead of saying to myself, well, what do I want? What's the next professional thing I'm going to do, right? That would have been overwhelming. Instead, I say to myself, well, what do I want my day-to-day life look like? What do I want my mornings to look like? What do I want? I'm a natural night owl. How do I feel about still getting up really early and getting into an office, right? You start asking yourself those smaller questions, because that's going to help you inform. It's going to do two things. It's going to help you inform the bigger picture of what do I want when you are ready to create that thing. But it's also going to help you identify the things that you like and you want to keep and the things that you want to shift. And so when we're comfortable with those smaller decisions, especially if you're leaving a toxic or narcissistic relationship, you'll need time to recalibrate through those smaller decisions. Then we can start thinking about what we want on a bigger scale. What are the parts of me I'm going to carry forward? What's the parts of me that I don't want to carry forward? Bringing us to some new awareness about our values and beliefs, which our values and beliefs can definitely change over time and define who we are. And all of those pieces are going to help shape that new identity. I'm going to give an example. Maybe it'll feel like a more positive example of coaching. So many of you know, I spent more than 20 years in Los Angeles, moved back up to the Pacific Northwest after several attempts through the process of my very long, protracted divorce to be closer to family. And after, that kind of first, probably a year, getting the kids settled in and whatnot, I really, and in the process of that year, I really was thinking about, what do I want the next stage of my life to look like? And so I did some research and some planning, and I settled on becoming a coach. So I researched a whole bunch of programs and got into my program. I was certified through Erickson Coaching, International Coaching, which is, if you're ever thinking about doing that, they are a fantastic organization. Highly recommend them. And as I went through that 18-month coaching certification, so much about who I was changed. My beliefs about what people can do, how they can make change in their lives, my beliefs about myself, how I could help somebody do that, how I show up in a room, what's the language that I use, my values around wanting to help others was really honed, the desire to do that without really understanding. This is so common when you become a therapist or a coach, or you're in the self-help arena. You want to help everybody. And anyone that's been in this space for any period of time understands that if you want to help everybody, you help no one, right? You have to kind of focus that. So that process in the early stages of my coaching certification of wanting to help everyone, that was a shift that I had to move through over several years. And it took me a long time to really finally decide what the group of people specifically that I wanted to help were. So you can see in this example of me moving through this coaching certification, I had to think about the parts of me I wanted to keep and the parts of me that I wanted to shift as I moved into this new identity as a coach and what that meant for me. So just keep that in mind. We take lots of little steps to make those shifts that shape who we are becoming. Now, the next thing is when you're going through this process, when you're shifting out of being lost, and this has a lot to do with being in toxic relationships, your nervous system is recalibrating. All right. If you've spent a long time in survival mode, especially, this sounds kind of silly, right? But especially when you've been in high stress or toxic environments, your brain and your body are used to being in survival mode, as opposed to your nervous system being in a more static, calm state, or even a thriving mode, right? So what this means is that your nervous system is not used to slowing down. It's not used to having space or calm. It is constantly going, constantly moving. And when things do start to shift, your body, your nervous system can be very disoriented. It can feel very confusing. It'll lead to maybe feeling scattered or disconnected. And it can often, this is going to sound really strange, but it often you feel like you can't think clearly, when the truth of the matter is, when you're in survival mode, when your nervous system is constantly running in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, your neocortex, your thinking brain, can't be processing at the level that you want it to be processing. So just that shift can feel very disorienting. as you move through this getting out of the fog phase, finding yourself, your nervous system is recalibrating, and that takes some time to do. Now, here's the good news. You can do things to help you work through this stage more quickly and easily. We talk about these things all the time. Breathing intentionally, deeply, rhythmically, using grounding practices, putting your feet on the ground, looking around, doing some of those anxiety exercises. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you can touch, and 1 thing you can taste, right? If you're strong in senses, if your senses are strong in other ways, I'm highly visual, you can switch that around. Moving gently, right? Whether that's taking a walk with your dog, just being outside, yoga, meditation, tai chi, moving gently. And the last one we've talked about in a couple of episodes is resetting your polyvagal nerve. And if you Google that, there's a video, I think, on YouTube that pops up pretty near the top that there's a couple of exercises you can reset your polyvagal nerve quickly and easily. All of those things are going to help you recalibrate your nervous system, get out of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And eventually, your system's going to catch up and start to feel quote unquote normal. What is normal, right? You'll start to feel more calm. You'll start to feel more peace and maybe even bored. Boring, not bored, boring. Life gets boring. That's actually a good thing, right? That's a sign that your nervous system is like, oh, cool, we don't have to be on hyper alert all the time. And when you feel all those things, then you really start to feel freedom. You start to feel that freedom. You start to get clarity, and you start to get clarity on what that freedom looks like for you. I find this next piece is really interesting. Your toxic person or your narcissist wants you to feel lost. This is not the first time you've heard me say this. That is their intention. When you're in an environment that's toxic, so much of your energy, this is why you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So much of your energy goes in to managing other people, anticipating reactions, keeping the peace, trying not to make things worse, being small so that you don't offend their need to be large, right? So think about what happens when all of that is gone. When you've moved out of the toxic space and you're moving into your own new identity. You're using your own values and beliefs to decide who you want to be. Now, change can be uncomfortable. So that transition can feel uncomfortable sometimes, but recognize that's because you're no longer reacting. You're not reacting to that person who wants you to feel lost. And again, it takes us time to make this transition to this shift into a new identity. Not only does it take time, it takes practice, right? My example about being a coach is over the course of 18 months, I was able to practice regularly with my cohort what it looked like to make those shifts into becoming someone that I believed myself to be, which was a coach. So yeah, in toxic relationships, especially, there's confusion and exhaustion, and second guessing yourself. Now, a lot of this is going to be determined by how close you are to your toxic person or your narcissist, how much time you spend with them, how long the relationship has lasted, and frankly, how fed up you are. How much frustration and anger are you allowing to filter through that confusion and exhaustion and feeling of being lost? Because that's relevant, right? You might feel like, I don't know what's real anymore. I don't trust myself. I don't know what to do. And then something happens and you're done. You're done. Now, whether this means you leave, you're ready to leave, or you still have some details to work out, that part isn't as relevant. When you are in a toxic or narcissistic relationship, there's a moment. And when that moment occurs for you, it's going to be the thing that starts to lift the fog and removes some of that feeling of being lost. Now, maybe not all of it, right? I've talked about in previous episodes that I got to a point with my ex that it was me or him. It was me or him. And yet knowing that I'd hit a limit that I'd never even dreamed I had, let alone thought I'd ever hit. I mean, it just sounds so ridiculous to say this. My plan was that I would leave when the kids were grown. Right? In hindsight, I feel really silly about that. That I would stay in a relationship that I knew wasn't working, where I had come to feel so lost, so confused, so disconnected, not just to the people around me, but to myself. Even after I'd had that realization, I still intended to stay for 15 years till my kids were grown. So first and foremost, there is never any judgment here. Right? We do what we can do when we can do it. And just because we know that we've hit that limit and that can be a signal or a sign that it's time to make a change, that doesn't mean we're going to leave right away. And that's okay. That's okay. Even after you decide what's right for you and that you really want to make a change, you may also be surprised that you don't feel instant relief. That fog is lifting and you still feel a little lost and maybe alone or confused, disconnected, fearful. This is also completely normal. When you finally get to that point of knowing that a toxic relationship is no longer sustainable. And again, this can be after 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or it can be after 5 months. You aren't just processing what will inevitably be the loss of that relationship. There is so much more to it than that, right? If it's a job, then we're not just thinking about losing that job. We're thinking about what happens to our income, what happens to paying the mortgage, what happens to losing the risk of losing the connections I've made there or my friends there. How am I going to do that? There's still so many other things that impact the decisions we make. And if your narcissistic or toxic relationship is with someone that you have an intimate relationship with, wow, that list just gets longer and longer. Right? So, in addition to all of those other losses, you feel lost, you finally realize something needs to change. You're thinking about how you're going to do that, and it doesn't feel like relief because part of you recognizes all the other things that you're going to lose. And one of those things is the version of yourself that has existed inside that toxic relationship, your role, your patterns, your identity with that dynamic. So please, please, please give yourself some grace and space. It's, when we are in toxic relationships, narcissistic relationships specifically, there is so much tied together that needs to be unraveled. Please give yourself some space and know that it takes time. And a community. So being in a space like this where others can relate to what you've been through, It's really, really powerful. You may not feel like you have a clear direction yet. This space may feel challenging. Having a community, being in a space like this, knowing there are others out there that understand how you feel, turning to those tips that someone like me who's been through it can give you, focusing on what you want, and use everything, build a new wheelhouse, and use those skills in every area of your life. And then notice when you do that, as you're doing that, every decision you make starts to become in alignment with what you want, who you want to become. It gives you clarity and certainty. And that doesn't mean, I've already said this, when we are moving away from feeling lost or in that fog, it does not mean that freedom is right around the corner. I know, ugh. What it does mean is you're no longer aligned with the relationship or the situation that was keeping you stuck, right? And that the steps that you need to take to move forward might still feel disruptive. So here's where leaning into change can be super powerful, right? Most of us resist change. We equate change to pain. We want the clarity before we move. We want the certainty before we decide. We want to know it's going to work before we take the risks. And that makes total sense. Except that's not how it works. We got to start to make the changes in order to get the results. Change doesn't have to be painful. Yes, you're growing, so it might feel uncomfortable or uncertain. The thing is, though, look at it this way. Change is happening around us all the time. We can't control or stop change. So lean in. It makes this process so much easier. Waiting to feel ready, that's not going to help you because that doesn't happen. Right? What if change isn't something to fear, but something to honor? I can tell you definitively, with absolute certainty, that every meaningful shift in my life, every moment where I grew, or I chose differently, or I stepped into something better, required me to change. What if changing is actually where everything is happening in our lives? Right? Even if you don't have all the answers yet, or don't feel settled, even if you can't fully see it yet, your willingness to lean into change, to stay in the process, to take the next step, that's where freedom comes from. That's where freedom, whatever kind of freedom you're looking for, is created. Right? And if we can look at it that way, maybe what feeling lost is a signal or a sign that something isn't quite right in our lives. And so we can lean into the change because of that. We get that awareness, something isn't right. And it gives us an opportunity to start. All right, so here's some tips on how to be doing this process, how to move away from feeling lost, getting out of that fog phase and into clarity, which is where freedom lives, which is where peace and calm and joy live, which is where your nervous system is regulated. The first one is don't rush clarity. I always think it's funny when I give you guys suggestions that I myself struggle with endlessly. I am always making this mistake. I always want to know yesterday what I can do tomorrow. Always. And yet, when we don't rush clarity, when we can sit still and stop overthinking, we can get clarity. Clarity comes from movement. And clarity comes from making those small, consistent decisions and actions and steps that move us forward. So this is the next tip, which is to focus on just the next step, not the whole path. You don't have to have your entire life figured out. And even if you thought you did have your whole life figured out, it's not going to turn out that way. Life is not lived linearly. We do not go from A to B to C to D to E to F to G to blah, 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 blah. We just don't, that's not how it works. Life does not work that way. And it's really a fallacy on our part to hope that it will. I'm sorry for anybody's bubble I'm bursting. Right? All we need is the next step. One decision, one step, one action. Do one thing and then look around and evaluate. How'd that go? What went well? What could I have done better? Right? And then decide on what the next step is to take. And then take it and look around and follow that process. Right? Now, this is where knowing what we want is critical. If I know that I want to get my master's degree in criminal justice, I can't map out everything. I'm not going to necessarily know what school I'm going to go to. I'm not going to know what I'm going to get on my GRE, or in my case, thankfully, I didn't have to take it. So all I could do was take the next step. Oh, I'm going to start. I'm going to apply here. And then I'm going to see what happens. And then I'm going to decide, oh, I can't possibly apply for school because I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. Nope, you don't need to decide that in that moment. You apply. You get accepted, and then you figure out what you're going to do. All right? You don't need the whole path. Just take the next step. We've already talked about this. Regulate your nervous system. Use all those things that we've already talked about. Regulate your nervous system, right? Because as we move out of survival mode, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and we move into a calmer and more peaceful and ultimately thriving and free space, right? Events that once triggered us aren't going to trigger us any longer. They become more manageable and processable. I don't know, is that a word? Processable? It becomes easier to process them, right? My example of this is the first time that my ex-husband took me to court, I was in a complete panic. I was so stressed out. The thought of standing, I was in a divorce with my attorney, his attorney, my ex-husband, who's a non-practicing attorney, and me. Out of the four of us, I was the only one that wasn't an attorney. Now, I wasn't completely unaware of how the criminal justice system worked, but it was horrible. My nervous system was just screaming at me, right? But after literal years of being drugged to court, but near the end, it didn't faze me. It didn't trigger me anymore. His intent was to continue to abuse me and the kids through the legal system. That is a very real thing. And by the end, it didn't work. So when we learn how to regulate our nervous system, when we're actively practicing that, when we're more attuned to our bodies and the signals that our bodies are trying to give us, right? Those triggering points won't work any longer. And, this is the coach in me. Get curious instead of being judgmental, right? Again, I've had all of the situations we've talked about here. And where I felt it most prevalently was in leaving this last job with this toxic boss. I had to stop asking the question, what's wrong with me? I had to spend a lot of time learning how to say, what does this experience mean? What is it showing me? What's a better direction for me? How can I be more effective? Where's the right path for me? And when we ask different questions, everything changes. We talk about this all the time, right? What you tell your brain is what your brain believes. Well, this is part of that. The questions you're asking yourself shift what your brain is focusing on. We can thank our reticular activating systems for that. That's what that part of our brain does. All right. And I just want to put out there that I've learned this just recently in the last 6 to 10 months. And that is, you asking yourself better questions doesn't mean that anyone else has the right to those answers. You don't have to share it. This process can feel very private. It can be something that you process internally. And that doesn't mean to say that you don't talk to friends, connect with people, or talk to a therapist, or be in a group that you can share with, right? It's not about doing it alone necessarily. It's about knowing that going through this process privately and keeping it close to yourself and to those people, only to those people you really, really trust, that's okay. It's okay. It's okay to do that until you're ready to share what's new about you or how your new identity, when your new identity is ready to become public. I've seen this a lot in my own life. That shift out of a toxic environment or a relationship, my identity shifting as I'm working through the fog. It all happens. It comes together. And it really took me starting this book and breaking it down into quarters to make sense of this process, which is in part why I wanted to share it with you. Right? That first phase, for sure, that first quarter, it was all fog. It was uncertainty. It was not having all the answers. It was questioning things. And it was incredibly healing. And I really am not sure that I would have been able to, what's the word I'm looking for, to capture everything had I not been writing about it. Right? And what I really have realized is that phase, I'm going to start calling it the first quarter phase, the feeling lost, coming out of feeling lost, getting out of your fog, albeit uncomfortable and uncertain, it was absolutely not wasted time. It was a really necessary step in coming into a new space, renewed and more certain, and heading full steam towards freedom and joy. If you feel lost right now, you may very well be in the middle of something. Something old is falling away, and that something new hasn't fully formed yet. That uncomfortable, unclear, frustrating space, that's where your life starts to change and shift. And oh man, it is definitely worth working through. This podcast is a valuable resource for anyone seeking to make meaningful changes in their life. I'm here to support you on your unique journey, offering guidance and encouragement every step of the way. There will be new episodes on the second and fourth Wednesday every month. Please follow on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss any episodes. And also, please rate, share, like, follow, and subscribe. All the things. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode on feeling lost. Remember, feeling lost can be an indicator that we are ready for and need change, growth, and up-leveling in our lives. Lean in. It's well worth the ride. As we wrap up, here's the thing. I've made every mistake. I've literally been there and done that. It's one step at a time, and you'll get there. There's hope. You've got this. If you're struggling in a relationship and wondering if it might be controlling, you're not alone. Download my free PDF at locatecoaching.com/free gift to help you find clarity and confidence. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you soon.